Hi, welcome to the series of Jasper Reports. In this session, we are going to learn about list component in Jaspersoft Design Studio. The agenda for this session is, firstly, I will walk you through on the basics of list and list component in the studio. Then we take a look at the properties of a list component. And finally, we will see an example on how we can create a list component and how we can use that list component in a customer detail report. Let's get started. What is a list? In Java, a list specifies the ordered collection of objects. List allows duplicate values. Now, what is a list component? List component in the studio is a basic element. It is used to print the related information of a particular record. Now, what is the advantage of list component over subreport component? Basically, to print the related information of a particular record in the studio, we have two options. Either we can go with the subreport component or we can go with the list component. We generally avoid taking the subreport component to display the related information of a particular record. Instead, we go with the list component. Subreport requires to create and compile the templates. That means we are additionally creating a subreport resource to the master report, and this would become cumbersome when the master report has a lot of subreports. So using the list component, we can reduce the burden on the master report, and eventually we can increase the load performance of the report. So that is why we avoid subreport component and we use the list component to display the simpler related information of a particular record. Now let us have a look at the properties of list component. A list component can contain any of the report elements. That means it can include a static text field, a text field, or a graphical element, and it supports most of the palette elements in it. The properties of list component includes ignore width, cell height and cell width, fit to element, and fit to content, and print order. Let us briefly look at each of these properties with their options. Ignore width. Ignore width is a flag option. It can be either true or false. By default, ignore width is, but the default value for ignore width is unset. Unless ignore width is set to true, the list will by default break when the critical width of the list is reached. Now, list is a single cell object and it contains height and width. Fit to element and fit to content. Fit to element fits the cell size to the element inside the list, and sorry, basically fit to element fits the cell to the size of the list element itself. Now fit to content fits the cell size to the content inside the list. Now what is print order? Print order specifies how the values of a list should be rendered. The possible options with print order are horizontal and vertical. The default print order is vertical. If we select the print order as vertical, then the values of the list will be printed in vertical sequence. Now, if we select the print order as horizontal, then the values of the list will be printed in horizontal sequence. Like the table component in the studio, a list is also requires to create a data set. That means we cannot map main report to data set or say the main data source to the list component. Now let us move on to the example. So in the example, we are going to see how we can create a list component and how we can use that list component in a customer report. So the scenario here is customer details. We are going to display the information of a customer in a single report. That means we are not going to take any sub reports for this one. Instead, we are going to display the customer information as a list within the report. So we are going to display the customer name on the detail band and the related information such as address, city, state, country, phone number. These information we are going to display under the name of the customer using the list component. And to make the data dynamic of this list component uh, with the actual with the main data set, we are going to pass an internal parameter to the list. So let us see how we can create a list and how we can get this related information on the customer detail report. So to start with, let's create a blank report from file, new, Jasper report. Then select the blank report from the report templates wizard. Then let's name the report. That means let's save the report with this name, list component, and it should be customer detail report here, customer detail report. So let's name the report here. I'm going to save it under the reports folder of Jasper Reports 2021 project. Click on next, then select the Foodma database from the data adapter dropdown, and let's apply this query. So the main query, we are going to display so the main data set, using the main data set, we are going to display the customer name, and under that customer name we are going to display the details such as address, phone number. So for the main query, let us take customer ID and customer name. So in the customer table we have this customer ID and first name, last name information. So I am limiting the records to 10 because it has a lot of customers. For this demonstration, let's limit it to 10 records. So click on next, then take these two fields, click on next, and then click on next, then click on finish. So from the outline, go to the fields node and select these customer ID and customer name fields. So we don't require, let us remove the unnecessary bands from the design space. We don't require page header, and we don't require column header and column footer, page footer, and the summary band. So we have the customer ID and customer name on the detail band. Let us quickly preview how this shows up on the report output. So this is a this represents the customer ID and the customer name in the output. Now we are going to use a list component and we are going to display the related information of the each customer under his or her name. So for that, so as I mentioned, like table component, a list component also requires to a data set to be created. So for that, I am going to create a data set from the outline, select the root node, then click on create data set. Then let's go with the first option, which is create new data set from a connection or data source. And the name of the data set is dataset1 here by default. Select the Foodma database. Now let's query the customer table with the address, city, state, province, country, and phone, and let's filter it with for a particular customer. So we are going to pass a parameter for customer ID to make the data consistent with the main data set query. So let's go with this one here. Let's take all the fields and click on next, and let's skip group by and click on finish. Now we have a data set created for the details of the customer name. Now from the palette section, select the list component and drag it onto the detail pane. So there are two options to create a data set here. Create a list using new data set and create a list using an existing data set. In the previous step, we already created a data set to be used for this list. So go with the default option here, which is data set one that we just created, and then click on next. And let's take the connection as use same JDBC connection used to fill the master report. So let's select the first option and then click on next. And let's take all of the fields to be displayed on the list. So the fields are address, one, city, state, province, country, and phone number. Let's finish. Now we can see the list is created. So the list node is appearing on under the detail band here. So let's adjust the let's format this with. So like table component and cross type component, it gets its own outline. We can see that here. It comes with styles, then the data set, that is being used by this list, then the list content with the field names. So I am going to format this list. Now let's label each of these text fields here. This indicates the address. So let's label this as address, and let's copy the label created for the remaining fields, and we can replace the content inside it. And from the settings, select the show grid option, so we can remove the pixels on the background. And let's increase the visibility. Now multi-select all of them, and let's position these elements horizontally and vertically in the middle. Now we have the list ready. Let's change these labels with the corresponding titles for each of the fields: city, then the state, and then country, and the phone number here. So now we have the list ready. Let's have a look at the default properties that shows up on the list. So in the properties, these are the appearance, inheritance, or the default properties, and data set. This we have selected while we dragging on the list component, and on the list component we can see ignore width. By default it is unset. That means it is neither true nor false. And the cell height is taken as 150 pixels, and cell width is taken as 280 pixels, while we increasing the height and width using the drag and drop mechanism. So fit to element, for example, I am increasing the list width a bit more by dragging. Now if I click on this fit to element, this specifies the basically fit to element fits the cell size to the element. So when I say element here, the element is nothing but the list. So when it is, for example, if the data is huge in each of the test wheel, it will it will fit to the element. And if I select this fit to content, we can see it only fits to the content inside the list. So this is how we can understand the difference between fit to element and fit to content, and the default print order is vertical. So let us go with the fit to element, which is default option here. Now let us run this report. So now we can see the customer ID, the customer name, then the uh, related information from the list. But if we closely look at this output, we can see that the same data is repeating for each of the customer. Here the address is taken as 243 Valley Road, and city is let me zoom in, Oaxaca and Mexico, and this is a phone number, and the same information is displayed. That means the list data is not dynamic with the main data set output. So to do that, we have to tell this list to dynamic with this customer name data. For that, we have to pass an internal parameter to the list. So let's create a internal parameter of integer type for the customer ID. We are going to pass customer ID uh, for the list here. So right click on the parameters, then click on create parameters. Let's go with the default name, and the type should be integer because customer ID is an integer type in the database. And let's skip providing these other options here. So now we have parameter 1 created, and we are going to use this parameter 1 in the data set 1 for the list. So right click on the data set from the outline view, then click on data set and query to bring up the SQL editor of that particular data set. Now in the bottom, click on this parameters tab. We can see the parameter created in the list here. Now let's replace this hard-coded value of 1 with the parameter 1. So just select and drag it onto the area of the value. Now we have replaced the customer ID with the parameter. So let's click OK. Now we have to map that parameter onto the list component. So let's select the list and go to the data set. And here we can see how we can map the parameters. So we need to click on this parameters option here, then click on add button on the wizard. Now from the parameter configuration dialog, let's select the parameter name that we created. In the drop down, we can see the parameter 1 here, then parameter expression. So this parameter expression, as this is an internal parameter to make the data dynamic with the main data set, we have to pass the customer ID field information to the list so that the data will get dynamic with the main data set. So select the customer ID, and these fields are coming up from the main data set. Now we need to pass this customer ID to the list. So click on finish, then click OK, then click finish. Save the report. So before preview, let's give a title to the report. We will use the same name that we used for the that we used while we saving the report. So let's give it the title as list component customer detailed report. Finish. Then this one here, let's increase the font size, bold it, then position the text. Now let us bold this customer ID so that it will be easy to understand the output. So let's remove the empty space. Now let's preview this report and see how the output comes up on the list. So let's decrease. So now we can see that the different related information is displayed for each of the customers. So for this customer, we can see the address is differing from the second customer here. So the address starts with 2433 here, and it should be 2219 here. And in the other pages, as we limited to the records, we are seeing the top 10 records and the related information of the each customer. So basically this is a simpler information. The same functionality we can achieve through the sub reports. But as I mentioned, sub report requires compilation, and sub reports is altogether a new report. And you know the in the real time, we need to maintain these lot of sub reports for this simple information uh, uh, in the reporting framework. So generally we avoid sub reports so that we can increase the report load performance. So let's come back to the design mode. And in the theory, we have seen that list also supports most of the elements from the palette. So for example, I can increase the width of this one. And if I go to the outline view of this list, let me try to put this rectangle here, rectangular ellipse. Let's take the ellipse here and drag it onto the list component. So this is something like a sub report, but we actually do not consider it as a sub report, but it supports most of the elements from the palette section. Now, if I go back to the preview mode, each customer will get this ellipse printed in its detail. So let's preview this one. So for each of the customer, we can see additionally the ellipse is printed. That means it supports most of the elements from the palette section. So this is how we can create a list, and we can use this list for a customer report. So this brings us to the end of the session on the list component in Jaspersoft Design Studio. I hope you're a little clear on what we saw in this session, but and before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap of what we have seen so far. So going back to the PPT, so in the first place, we have seen the definitions of a list and definition of a list component in the studio. Then we walked through the properties of the list component, and we have finally we have seen how we can create a list component and how we can make use of that list component to print related information in a customer detail report. This should be customer here. So that's all for this session. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates.